Welcome, everyone. It's an honor to welcome you to the Conscious Denver Conscious Cities Festival 2025. I'm Dr. Dara Cunningham, and I have the privilege of opening this gathering, one that is more than just a festival. It's a moment in time where we come together, pause, and ask ourselves, how can we design a world that nurtures us rather than drains us? How do we create and restore our connection to place, to time, and to each other? Denver is a city of movement. We're a place of adventure, innovation, and growth, but also a place that values nature, community, and reflection. And yet, in a world that constantly accelerates, in cities that are increasingly shaped by technology and efficiency, we often find ourselves feeling disconnected from the very spaces we live in. That's why this year's Conscious Cities Festival is centered around the theme of regrounding. What does it mean to reground? Regrounding is about slowing down and paying attention to our surroundings, to our routines, to the impact that architecture, urban design, and technology have on our well-being. It's about recognizing that our built environment is not neutral. It either supports our health, happiness, and creativity, or it erodes them. This festival is about shifting the way we think about the cities we live in. Instead of adapting ourselves to poorly designed spaces, what if we designed consciously in ways that support human flourishing, social cohesion, and environmental sustainability? Today, we'll explore three key questions that drive this movement. Reconnecting with place. How do we design spaces that make us feel truly at home, that foster a sense of belonging, and that strengthen our connection to nature and community? The design of time. Can our environments help us slow down? Can we create spaces that encourage meaningful interactions, deep work, and personal well-being rather than just productivity and speed? The Human-Tech Convergence. As AI, smart cities, and sensing technologies become deeply embedded in our lives, how do we ensure that these innovations enhance rather than diminish what makes us human? Our speakers today are a collective of thinkers, designers, and visionaries. This is not just a conversation about ideas, it's about action. And that's why we're so lucky to have an incredible lineup of speakers who bring diverse perspectives, expertise, and passion to this space. We're joined today by Megan Mazzocco, Don Ruggles, and Sarika Bajoria, three architects who understand not only how to design buildings, but how to shape experiences. They'll help us explore how architecture can create environments that support mental and physical well-being. We'll also hear from Madeline Sapeta, an interior designer at Workplace Resource, who brings deep knowledge of how the spaces we inhabit every day, our workplaces, homes, and public areas, can be transformed into places of inspiration and balance. And of course, we have the wisdom of Dr. Lisa Jerome, Dr. Claudia Folska, whose research and work push the boundaries of how we think about human behavior, accessibility, and the science of well-being in the built environment. So this is a call to action. We are here not just to listen. This is an invitation to engage, to collaborate, and to reimagine the world we are building together. Every decision we make about our cities, our public spaces, and even our workplaces has the potential to heal or harm, to connect or isolate, to inspire or exhaust. So today, let's take a step back. Let's listen, reflect, and challenge ourselves to be more conscious in the way we design, the way we live, and the way we shape the future. Thank you for being here, for being part of this conversation, and for your commitment to creating a better, more conscious Denver. Welcome to the Conscious Denver Conscious Cities Festival 2025. And we're going to start today with Sarika. If you want to share, Sarika, we can get started.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So first, I just wanted to say I'm so thrilled to be here at Conscious Denver. And I feel it's a privilege also as a fellow at the Center for Conscious Design to be part of this global conversation taking place at all these different conscious cities around the world. looking at the relationship between place and our flourishing as a species. And it's really such an important conversation, as Dara mentioned. And I also wanted to thank Dr. Dara Cunningham for giving me the opportunity to share my work on contemplative design with all of you today, both online and in person. And I just feel like it's too bad I couldn't be in Denver because I've never been there. And it's such a beautiful place. I hear all about it. So now, impetus to get there. And also because Dara and I have been working with many other co-investigators on really exciting research project on contemplative design that I'm going to share with you. But now I'm just going to dive in. I hope everyone can see my screen. Okay. So it's hard to believe that it has been 5 years since the world underwent a radical transformation due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Remarkably, during the first lockdown in Italy in spring 2020, a group of researchers conducted a large study of 8,000 healthy students. They found that 75% of students living in poor indoor quality spaces during the lockdown exhibited an increase in depressive symptoms compared to only 33% living in high quality indoor spaces. Even a fairly short amount of time in poorly designed spaces can lead to these kinds of effects on our mental well-being. We, as architects, designers, researchers, policymakers, must do better. And here we are gathered today at the Conscious Cities Festival to do better, to further the dialogue on how we can consciously build flourishing futures through the design of our built environments, the single factor that affects us for 90% of the time. So what does better look like? So let's go to the Pantheon in Rome. Nearly 2,000 years old, it has welcomed millions of visitors to its portico and beyond. Probably many of you have been there. In a large study of the experience of visitors to the Pantheon, it was discovered that it was the architecture of the building itself, the form, space, size, light, that left a profound impression on the visitors, not so much the religious significance of the building. Even for devout Christians, visitors reported that just spending time in the Pantheon induced strong feelings of beauty, awe, curiosity, timelessness, contemplation, sacredness. The kind of experiences visitors had in the Pantheon go beyond the subjective. Buildings intentionally designed for contemplation are able to evoke psychological and brain signatures that are consistently different from those evoked by ordinary buildings. Just viewing images of contemplative spaces enhances attention and focus and oneness with the space and reduces anxiety, distractions, and the sense of ego. These psychological changes are accompanied by decreased engagement in the prefrontal cortex, where the sense of self-analysis and criticism resides. What's astounding is that these same kinds of changes in the brain are also seen during peak flow states and in experienced contemplative practitioners in deep contemplation. The research I just described suggests that built environments that are intentionally designed for contemplation can almost effortlessly promote feelings of presence, peace, connection, and even self-transcendence. No app required. Instead, it's as easy as opening a door. So why is it that places that have this kind of power are so rare? In a recent visit to Louis Kahn's Kimball Museum in Texas, I experienced the power of place to almost effortlessly put me in a contemplative state by communicating so viscerally and relating its story. I found myself contemplating a question that has intrigued me since I was a sophomore in college and first opened a book by Kahn. What went on in Kahn's mind moment by moment when he was designing and imagining these spaces? These spaces whose aura was nudging me to open up and engage in conversation. Compared to most architects, Kahn wrote a lot about his design thinking and process, but as powerfully stated by Paul Goldberger, what went on in his head moment by moment while he made his telling sketches, even Kahn himself would not have been able to articulate. This illustrates how the inner space of the designer is a blind spot in our education and profession. So, how can we begin to illuminate this blind spot, the mysterious inner place from which the outer spaces spring? Well, we are rightly focused on the outer technologies to design spaces of flourishing, and this Conscious Cities Festival is furthering that dialogue. However, how often do we give attention to the inner technologies to design flourishing designers? So you might ask, why is it critical to design flourishing designers? I argue that the inner space of the designer and the outer spaces they design are not separate, but deeply, deeply interdependent. Merleau-Ponty beautifully captures the essence of this inner technology. How would the painter or poet express anything other than his encounter with the world? Shedding light on the blind spot can begin from groundbreaking research taking place in the burgeoning field of the science of human flourishing, which is integrating studies in neuroscience, psychology, and contemplative practices. The most robust framework for training in human flourishing to date has been proposed by the neuroscientist Dr. Richard Davidson and colleagues that brings to light 4 core dimensions of human flourishing that we all can actively cultivate: awareness, connection, insight, and purpose. Training in specific contemplative practices geared to each of these 4 flourishing dimensions leads to measurable, sustainable, positive psychological and neurobiological benefits as our brains remain neuroplastic as we age. The key takeaway is that flourishing is a skill. We can train in flourishing, and through this training, we can change our minds and rewire our brains. In other words, flourishing is actively empowered well-being, and that's a game changer. So designers can have the means to imbue their projects with dimensions that promote the flourishing of the end users. I believe the best approach is to integrate these skills within the design process itself and tailor them to how designers think, work, and imagine. Drawing on the science of human flourishing, neuroaesthetic psychology, and my experience of practicing architecture and studying and teaching contemplative practices, I have developed the Contemplative Designer Pedagogical Framework. This framework consists of 2 foundational dimensions: building the bridge of empathic imagination and supercharging meaning momentum, that incorporate the 4 core elements of flourishing proposed by Davidson and colleagues. So what is empathic imagination? The architect and scholar Juhani Pallasmaa states there are 2 levels of imagination. The formal imagination is primarily engaged with topological or geometric facts that projects the material object in isolation, whereas the empathic imagination evokes embodied emotive experiences, qualities, and moods, presenting it as a lived, multisensory experience reality in our life world. So how do we train in empathic imagination as designers in daily design life? We are not taught that. I propose that we must hone the skills of multisensory awareness and listening with wonder. In a moment, I will describe the practices and tools from the framework designed to train in these 2 key skills of empathic imagination. Geshe Kelsang Gyatso states that without intention, our mind would be motionless. The movement of our mind depends on intention. With this definition of intention, we see that it is action-oriented in the present, not something in the future that we normally associate intention with. When we synergize our core values with this new understanding of intention, we supercharge meaning momentum in our daily design process and start embodying meaning in our lives. I'll be diving into the specific practices to train in meaning shortly. The Contemplative Designer Framework formed the curriculum for the undergraduate seminar, Contemplative Design in Sacred Places, at Parsons School of Constructed Environments in fall 2023 and 2024, and the Interior Design Studio at the University of New Haven in fall 2024. In these courses, students trained in the Contemplative Designer Framework practices and worked to infuse these flourishing dimensions into the final project, a sanctuary for flourishing located in Washington Square Park and New Haven Green for the two different universities. Nested in these courses is the interdisciplinary research study that I was talking about, evaluating the impact of the framework on design processes, outcome, and student well-being that I'm going to introduce a little later. The contemplative design practices shown here constituted the training in empathic imagination that the students undertook. I will now provide some example artifacts from their reflective, handwritten, hand-drawn, hand-collaged journals to demonstrate how students engage with these contemplative design technologies. They started the semester by exploring through a visualization practice, drawing and writing in their journals, the memory of an embodied sacred experience in place and define what sacred means to them. Through active imagination practice and collage, they designed and inhabited what I call their inner sanctuary through heightening multisensory awareness, an inner contemplative space of belonging and creativity where they can more easily access their inner resources. And over the course of the semester, they learn to design from this inner space as the inner studio. Students practice what I call wonder and empathy walks in their daily environments every day, listening like an alien designer from Jupiter who just arrived on Earth, capturing familiar spaces as if they were a first contact encounter. Students at Parsons practice wonder and empathy walks in Grand Central Station, and New Haven students visited the Yale Art Gallery. Listening like an alien designer from Jupiter and walking in wonder, they engaged in conversation with the aura of the space as it spoke to them through writing love letters to and from the places of Grand Central. Together with this new way of listening to design elements and places, and through the act of drawing, they practiced architectural contemplation as embodied sacred experience at different kinds of contemplative spaces, a non-denominational chapel in New York City, an urban contemplative public plaza in New York City, a Victor Lundy's Unitarian Universalist sanctuary in Westport, Connecticut, deepening that contemplative dialogue with the place. Bringing all the empathic imagination practices together, they discovered the personality of their site, in this case, Washington Square Park in New York City, asking, who is the site, not what is the site? Students co-created this meaningful communal art as an act of generative listening with all their senses to better understand the layers of the site identity, understanding the site's embedded history, narrative, sacredness, her multisensory persona, emotional textures, materiality, and her future potential for transformation. Next, I will focus on select contemplative design tools the students practice to train in meaning through their design artifacts. Through a guided imagination practice, drawing and writing, students met their future designer self 20 years from now in their inner sanctuary, tapping into the essence of the two root questions of creativity. Who is myself, the capital S self, my highest future self, and what is my work, capital W word, my purpose. They designed an emotional blueprint of their intention for design through collage and through self-inquiry into their core values and declaring their personal design maxim, form follows blank. In this case, its form follows reflection. The maxim and the core values became the overarching intention and vision for their project in collaboration with the values of the site and the users. They designed and so how do these inner technologies they train in synergize with the outer technologies and ingenuity of design to create spaces of flourishing? In the courses, we explored, analyzed, and discussed how these flourishing dimensions can be evoked through specific emotions felt by the users, mediated by specific design attributes of the spaces. For example, awareness can be evoked through emotions of presence, peace, tranquility, and is mediated through intentional multisensory design attributes. Similarly, insight can be evoked through the emotions of self-knowledge, clarity, transformation, and is mediated through the intentional attributes of the craft of light, shadow, and silence. I'm sharing the experiential journey of a few students designed for their sanctuary for flourishing, a new kind of sacred place within the urban context of the New Haven Green, with the non-denominational chapels, spaces for community outreach, inclusivity, and being. These are intentionally designed to mediate empathic imagination and meaning through emotionally communicating with the users, interweaving multisensory design attributes, light, shadow, spatial, programmatic, temporal, and ritualistic elements in the spaces. Throughout the process, the students return to their handwritten journals, reflecting, employing, and iterating on the contemplative design tools to shape and guide their project narrative and design of the user experiences. As mentioned before, what's exciting is that a multidisciplinary research project with investigators from several institutions, including Dr. Dara Cunningham, who is our organizer at CCD Denver, was nested in these two courses that is currently in analysis stages. The objective of this study is to answer three key questions. First, what is the impact of the contemplative designer framework pedagogy on students' design processes? An array of investigational tools are being deployed to analyze student artifacts, including journals and project designs, to answer this question. Second, what is the impact of training in the contemplative designer framework practices on students' perceived well-being, both inside and outside of the academic environment? Student interviews and additional analytical tools are being used to answer this question. And third, what is the impact of the contemplative designer framework pedagogy on students' design outcomes, and how do users experience their design spaces? Here, expert external reviewers are evaluating student final designs for the strength of mediating flourishing dimensions through their spaces, and in-person participants and an online cohort will experience student design in virtual reality and answer questions about their experiences and strength of the design intention imbued within the spaces they experience. This research will also provide impetus for larger, more robust studies aimed at enhancing flourishing in design education and professional practice to facilitate the creation of more environments of flourishing. Through deploying the contemplative design technologies, designers can begin to embrace a more expansive and interdependent contemplative designer self. So coming back in conclusion to Merleau-Ponty, how would the painter or poet express anything other than his encounter with the world? How would the designer express anything other than her encounter with her world? What I hope I leave you with is the understanding that as designers, we have to transform how we encounter our world first, before we can transform the expression of it. As architect Alvarado said, architecture has an ulterior motive, the idea of creating paradise. It's time for all of us here today to take this mantra to heart in the face of the unprecedented challenges we face today. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to your questions and comments, and please feel free to contact me.
Thank you, Sarika. That was really great. So, as Sarika talked about in her presentation, buildings shape our minds. Oops, I don't know why that's moving forward. Spaces shape us. A hospital with no windows slows recovery. A school with overwhelming noise spikes stress. What if building designs could be adjusted in real time, learning from actual human experience? So my research focuses on developing ways to provide feedback from buildings in actual or situated use that can be used to make future designs better for humans. So the problem with a lot of buildings is that historically architects don't check back. So for example, here's an image of New York City's Hudson Yards development, which was meant to be a mixed-use development and has been praised for futuristic design, but criticized for being unwelcoming. Typically, most architectural projects are built and then the architects move on. They are not brought back to fix issues with the building generally. They don't check if a hospital feels calm, if a school is too loud, or if a therapy space truly supports healing. And that can be a problem. Buildings have an impact on our mental health. And here's an example of the Steno Diabetes Center in Denmark, which was specifically designed to reduce patient stress. So a badly designed mental health clinic can feel like a prison. A well-designed one promotes healing. Lighting, sound, and flexible layouts can lower stress and even reduce pain. The traditional way of gathering information about a building after it's built is post-occupancy evaluation, but those we've seen have not been used as much as they could be, and typically are more of a checkbox that the people in the building may have been surveyed with at some point. An example here of another building that looks beautiful from the outside, but is not has not been rated well by the people inside the building is the Royal Adelaide Hospital. It's a state-of-the-art facility, but patients have found it stressful and hard to navigate. So when you're someone coming to get medical treatment, not being able to figure out where you're going is a problem, even if the building looks beautiful. We have an opportunity to gather feedback about buildings in use in the way that we now rate other products. We are in a society now where we rate just about everything but buildings that we're in. But Airbnb does have people rate their spaces, and their users are able to rate things like soundproofing and comfort levels. But generally, hospital patients can't review their stress levels. So we have an opportunity to change that by gathering feedback about buildings in use. Reflective Activity Systems Theory, or RAST, is my framework for gathering feedback around buildings. And this is where we go back and give people the ability to reflect on their experience in the spaces that they're in and apply that feedback to future designs. So it's a feedback loop for buildings. And another example of a building that did use patient feedback is Maggie's Center Cancer Facilities in the UK. They've used patient feedback to refine their healing environments and make their experiences for their patients better for them. RAST can be used in schools to gather information about how the students are doing in those schools. And another example of schools that do gather feedback from both the teachers and the students is the Carol Gray Center, where they've designed sensory-friendly classrooms for students who are neurodivergent. And for example, for autistic students, loud hallways and flickering lights can be overwhelming. So with RAST, we can design learning spaces that actually work for neurodivergent students. In addition, we can gather information from other areas. It does not have to be inside a building. This is an example of trauma-informed design with the Friendship Bench project in Zimbabwe, where they gathered feedback around people who were coming to their mental health spaces and found that that feedback allowed them to put things in place that helped people feel better as they came in. One of the things that they found was just having a park bench outside for people to sit was much more welcoming than having people come into an office space. And with a socio-technological environment for ecological design database, or STEED, this gives us an opportunity to gather feedback from users or occupants of various spaces, and then give that feedback or provide it to designers who can use it later when they're designing something similar. So they can take in feedback from spaces that are in use and allow designers to apply that at a later date. And the example shown here is New York City's Highline Park. And that has evolved based on visitor feedback about seating, shade, and flow. So they gave people the ability to give feedback, and they gave feedback, and then they made changes to make it a better experience for them. In addition, we have an opportunity now in places like Colorado, where we are implementing psychedelic therapy as a practice for patients in mental health settings. So we have an opportunity to re-envision what those spaces could look like and how they can support the people who are on those inner journeys with things like soft lighting, natural textures, and flexible furniture to help improve the outcomes and provide them a space that is not going to induce stress while they're there. What happens when we ignore feedback is that we often have buildings that may be built to plan and operating the way that they should, but not in the way that the occupants need the building to work. And I have an example here of the Buckley Air Force Base Army helicopter repair facility, where I conducted research with the occupants of this space. And it's a LEED Gold facility. It's very climate friendly, sustainable space, but nobody talked to the people that were using the space before they built the space. And they have given feedback that it really does not meet their needs, particularly with multiple outdoor facing bays that are too cold in the winter, too hot in the summer. So the people working in those facilities aren't comfortable, and they're actually changing the energy usage for this highly efficient space by doing things like bringing in space heaters, fans, air conditioners, that type of thing. So that throws all of the calculations for energy use out the door. There are places like MIT that are working to gather feedback around spaces at a larger level, like cities. MIT's Cityscope AI is now being used to predict urban stress points and help to redesign public spaces. So AI can help us take the avalanche of feedback that you can get from a space like a city and help turn that into some actionable changes that we can make to affect the way that people feel about those spaces. Having the ability for people to give feedback and to use that in the future design process gives us smarter, more inclusive spaces. And this is an example of another space that is gathering feedback from inhabitants, and that is the Brain Mind Initiative, which uses AI to design PTSD-sensitive housing for veterans. So by gathering feedback from the people who live in those spaces and feeding that into an AI model, they were able to generate changes that made a difference to the way that those veterans felt about being in their space. We can use AI in sensory smart hospitals as well. Google now has Project Starline, which uses AI to create calming virtual windows in therapy rooms so that both the therapist and the patient have the experience of being in person even when they're not, and being in a soothing space. In addition, AI and the type of data that we can gather from people in spaces can help us be more sustainable in our designs. AI can help us with not just things like solar panels, but AI-driven buildings use less energy, provide better air, and adjust in real time to occupant needs. So as we get more into smart cities and smart buildings, we have the opportunity to incorporate AI power to make sure that the occupants are comfortable in those spaces. There are hotels now using AI-driven feedback to see higher guest ratings and lower complaints. This is an example of a hotel app called Canary. It's Canary AI, where hotel occupants can give feedback about their space and their experience of those hotels, and the hotel can use that to make for happier guests. There are concerns around privacy and ethics in the use of AI in architecture. In fact, a smart city project in Toronto, the Sidewalk Labs Smart City project, was canceled due to public backlash over data privacy concerns. AI-driven buildings can collect massive amounts of data, so it needs to be a consideration as we incorporate more and more AI into our technology, is how do we keep that data safe and secure and used, but not shown publicly to people who shouldn't have access to it. Another example of using AI in city planning is Singapore's Smart Nation project, where they're using AI and Internet of Things to optimize traffic flow, green spaces, and accessibility. So you can imagine if entire cities are using a smart system, AI could optimize traffic, detect heat islands, and create parks where people actually want them. And this is something that Singapore is doing now. So we have a call to action for smarter, healthier spaces. Here is an example of a sustainable building at the University of British Columbia. It's their Brock Commons Tallwood House. Is a mass timber net zero building designed for sustainability and student well-being. And they know from gathering feedback that it is achieving those aims. This brings us to a connection with the contemplative designer research that Sarika brought up earlier. And this is where we are gathering feedback from students and from subject matter experts evaluating student projects to really get a full picture of how students are learning to transform their design practices with the contemplative designer framework. What was most meaningful to them, what helped them to engage most and empathize with those who they design for. By integrating contemplative methods, the framework is able to support creativity as a habit that students are taught through mindfulness, embodied cognition, and reflection. So we are currently in the middle of conducting the research on this project at the New School in New Haven in Connecticut, talking directly to students who are taking classes with Sarika Bajoria. To rigorously evaluate the contemplative designer framework, as I mentioned, we are doing a multifaceted methodology. The students are keeping their own journals that are reflective about contemplative design practice. We have a framework that we're assessing in terms of how they're applying it and how useful they're finding the contemplative designer framework. And then we are comparing contemplative design with traditional students to see how the impact on students has changed them or changed the work that they can do. And the contemplative designer framework doesn't just influence what is designed, it also transforms how designers are educated. It considers design as inner work where educators train future designers to engage empathetically. We are also seeing that the contemplative methods yield designs that are attuned to the emotional, psychological, and sensory needs of the later users. And then also looking at educational well-being and how students feel about the way that they are being trained in design. So the outcomes so far for the contemplative designer study, again, we're in the midst of it, but we are currently seeing a boost in creativity and purpose that students are identifying. We are seeing improved design empathy, and we're seeing enhanced well-being metrics. So our students are expressing that they're able to take what they've learned in Contemplative Designer Studio and apply it to their everyday life. And the next step for us as we move into the next phase of this research is really looking at how we can reimagine design education to explicitly include well-being and contemplation. So that students have an opportunity to apply a contemplative design framework to their design process and to their own sense of well-being. The integration of the contemplative designer framework into neuroarchitectural discourse shows an alignment. Both are related in the belief that spaces shape and are shaped by our inner states. So, as Sarika brought up, the designer is going to design the world based on how they feel and what they see in the world. So, we have an opportunity to provide a sense of well being and empathy for designers moving into the world of design for purpose. And if you think about it, what's the worst space that you've been in? I would be curious to hear about that and what, if you think that you would have given feedback on it if you had the opportunity to do that. Right now, we're going to switch to Madeline Sapata.
So, welcome. My name is Madeline Spita, and I am the creative director here at Workplace Resource. And for those of you in person, we are in our new showroom called Workhouse. So, when I first learned of Conscious Denver through Dara, she asked to come and host this event here in our space. And after some reflection and talking with her, we realized it was a great example of this year's theme, which is reconnecting with place. And as I reflected on our company's goals with opening this new showroom, it really was all about reconnection. And we were seeking to reconnect with our downtown and the city of Denver. We have been in the Colorado area for 38 years and mostly operated out of our showroom out in Central Park. And it was time for us to have a reemergence in the downtown corridor and support the resurgence of our city. We also wanted to reconnect with our community and be closer to everybody that we get to collaborate with every day, including our clients, architects, designers, and community leaders. And ultimately, we saw the opportunity to deliver an inspiring experience. For those of you who are not familiar, Workplace Resource is a furniture dealership, and our partner furniture manufacturer is Miller Knoll. So as you can imagine, we partner with a lot of A&D firms and clients to supply them with the furniture that their space needs. And the showroom experience can be typical, and you just see product in which you're going to buy. And so we wanted to see what it could look like and feel differently from what everybody has experienced. So at the start of the process, our leadership team was very much driven and inspired by the Bauhaus movement, the concept of total design, and where architecture, interiors, furniture, objects all come together and are designed intentionally to work and play together. We drove inspiration from modernism, And again, instead of looking at just the objects that fill space, how do we look at the entire space as a whole and ultimately create a space that can solve larger problems and go beyond its one use and be a living example of that for our community and the people that we work with. Some of the design pillars that our leadership team worked with, they worked with the Gensler team here in Denver, Colorado. And they really helped lead our leadership team through discovery and understanding what really needed to be the foundation of the design of the space. And so the first pillar is, of course, our WR story and who we are and what we're about. The next was a bespoke experience, similar to what I've already spoken to. We wanted to create unique experiences and really a place that you could come and have a journey and feel inspired by. We also wanted to have a space that could flex and could be a place where ideas could happen. And that meant making sure different postures were supported, different types of gathering spaces were available so that you could really connect with the people you were working with. The next one is really about our purpose and what we strive as a company and as community leaders is that everybody feels like they can come into our space and that they can be our guests and are invited in. And of course, this is a showroom, and we wanted it to feel like a stage for all the products that you get to interact with. But we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just a white box and that we really celebrated a design and inspired moment. So next, it goes worth mentioning that I was brought into Workplace Resource last year in the summer. And that was right when this space was ready to go online. So I wasn't involved in all of these decisions and all this discovery that our leadership team did. So I'm going to walk through the plans and kind of speak to what I have been able to understand about the plan and kind of my own little critique of the space and how I think it's impactful with the way that it was designed and organized. So first, just looking at the floor plan of the space, recognizing that overall, the organization of the space and the circulation are very much impactful in the sense that it gave us enough organization, but then also left the floor plate loose enough for us to celebrate our different furniture vignettes. What's important is that we're obviously going to be growing in this space and changing. And so we needed to have a plan that could flex with the amount of that we will change over the floor with new furniture vignettes and new inspiring product. So looking at this current organization, I think it has created a really nice structure for us moving forward. Also, within looking at the different circulation, there's also these moments of interest and things that draw you through the space and really create a journey as you walk through. And the first one that happens is when you get right off of our elevator. You come up into a foyer space that is a little bit juxtaposition to what you normally would expect a workplace to feel like or a showroom. Normally, you're met with all of the product the minute you walk in. So, and that was by design. We wanted you to have this feeling of maybe a little disorienting and where should I go next and figure out your journey along the way. As you round the corner, you start to see our different spaces where we can gather. These are our main gathering spaces. And in a few moments, I'll share some of these points of interest with you so you can see what I'm talking about. But all these points of interest kind of follow along the circulation path and create great storytelling moments. And I think just pique your curiosity no matter which way you move through the space. So here's one of those moments right off of our great hall. We have what we call our grand hall, or really where we get to dine and share great conversations together. And then as you're in our great hall, or great room, I should say, you are captured by this yellow chair down in the distance. So it draws you into the space, making you want to kind of see what's around every corner. Another architectural element that I think was super successful that the team was able to focus on was how the ceiling reinforced the feelings as you're walking through the space. So the ceiling that you saw in this last picture, I'll just go back for a moment. This highly reflective ceiling is what is represented here in this orange section of the plan. It's also the lowest part of our ceiling throughout the space. So as you move through the spaces, the ceilings go up and down, and I think it gives you this opportunity to feel a relief as you move through the space and a little bit of a compression to know where you're at. So since it can be a place where you are trying to get around each corner to see where you are, there's also these visual cues to maybe get you back to that central hub. So here's that circulation pattern again to show how this is reinforced. The next piece is a reflection on the use of these softer divisions. So this is our space in one of the corners of our floor plate, and we have this series of curtains to help create some visual barriers. So again, looking at the floor plan and overlaying the ceiling plan, you can see with the darker red markers of where we have these secondary visual barriers. So when you're going through the space, you get to experience the space that you're in, and then your eye has stopped by these visual barriers, which I think helps you take in what you're actually looking at right in front of you, and then also creates a sense of curiosity and probably desire to see what's going to happen around the next section of the space you're touring or experiencing. It also allows us to create more intimate gathering spaces or opening up to larger gathering spaces. Next, it was a big part of our goal to invite our community in. And knowing that that was our goal, we wanted to have multiple places to gather. And throughout the space, we have endless opportunities of however we would like to host or how people could interact. One of the spaces, the maker space, this is specifically designed so that we can invite our architectural partners in to work on a palette, work on finishes with us as we're going through the furniture selection process, as well as, we can actually get work done here. We're not just socializing and having a great time, but it's a place where you can come and get some of your project done. Another piece is that in the great room, we are able to completely move the furniture off the plan and create a 200-person lecture. So we really have a great opportunity to, ignite the space in many different ways and hopefully make connections that we wouldn't otherwise have. So in closing, we're hoping that everybody starts to experience that this space is really a stage for workplace solutions, a gallery of objects and design, and a home for ideas and community. Ultimately, we want to be a place where you guys will feel a spark of curiosity and inspiration, and ultimately a place where you are being able to reconnect not only with your peers, but also with place. So thank you. And I think my thought is somebody needs to have a true experiment in our space to see how it's impacting the psyche, because I think it would be an amazing output. Or maybe we would have some things to change. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And next we have Dawn. Let's see, get your, I think the break is right after Dawn. Double check my schedule. Yeah, it is. I know, my handwritten schedule. Let's see. Okay, let's find your presentation. And is it called Conscious Cities Denver? Okay. Oh, okay then. So me move it to its own window. Okay. And then we'll go back and share the feed. And then see, start the slideshow. Okay, let's see. Okay. And then okay. I think that's good.
See all my.
Oh, they can see it. Oh, we don't want that. Oh, but it's not sharing your presentation. Okay. Okay. Well, what's that?
I have the thumb drive if you want that.
Oh, I'm just wondering if I should maybe open it on the other device. What it keeps doing is showing me panel view, but not your presentation there. Why? Let's see. I'm just going to go back and get your notes. I don't see. Okay. So it works a little differently than PowerPoint. Let's see if we can get it going again. Presenter view. Okay. And sharing.
Four, two,
Yeah. Yeah,
come back.
yeah, I think it might be a good time to take a break. We'll have to figure out why it doesn't want to show it, share, and have a separate presenter view. So why don't we go ahead and take some questions now? If you all have questions, we'll start working on how to get this shared properly. Any questions? I don't see any in the chat. Any questions in the room? No? No, okay. Someone's asking if I can talk a bit more about Steed. Yeah, Steed is a feedback database loop. So the way that Steed would be used is to collect feedback from all sorts of different locations and allow us to provide feedback to designers. So for example, if we had feedback on a LEED Platinum office building in a certain area or certain climate, we could gather feedback not just on the energy efficiency for the building, but also what people have to say about it and provide that to a designer who's looking to design something similar. So if you had a LEED Platinum building office space that you were looking to design, you could look up what people had to say about all of the other LEED Platinum buildings in a similar space and gather their feedback. So really that's the purpose of it, is to provide a design feedback loop and provide feedback from actual use of spaces, not just it looks good or, it's conveniently located, but really what is it like to be in that space and how does it make you feel? So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but that is the way that Steed is used. Yes, it's a customizable platform, and it's one that we're currently working on incorporating AI into. So it's not available publicly yet, but we're hoping it will be sometime in the near future. But yes, the idea is it would be customizable. So anyone who wanted to gather the feedback could customize what they're looking for, what type of project they have, and really the engine would go through and data mine and pull out the relevant feedback for whichever design project we're looking at. Thank you. And Ilse, question. How do we balance redesign versus cost to destroying existing organic neighborhoods?
This is coming from someone who lives in a definitely not designed urban environment. And there are certainly things that weren't consciously designed, but when you talk about conscious design, that would be ripping out neighborhoods that exist now. And how do you balance those differing motives?
Yeah, it's always a complex question, and it's one that we deal with all the time. And I don't know that there are great answers yet, although I have seen some really cool participatory design projects where people from neighborhoods that were being redesigned or gentrified were involved in the process of the planning for those sorts of neighborhoods. So I mean, while balancing keeping what's good about an existing space with needing to change it is something that we always try to do. The only real success I've seen is where the people that live there are actually involved in the process for planning. So participatory design is not, it's not used as much as it could be, right? Thank you. And
So I'm going to talk about some components of neuroscience and beauty today. And I wanted to say to Madeline, as the designer of this space, you did a great job. And I'm going to, from my point of view, and some of the components that I'm going to touch on today, mostly it's a stress-free environment. And that's what we're aiming for as designers, to create a proper neurological response. So I first started to look into this idea of combining neuroscience with architecture about 20 years ago. And that led me to write a book in 2017 titled Beauty, Neuroscience, and Architecture. And that led to a speaking career. And that eventually led to us making a feature-length movie titled Built Beautiful, and it's on Amazon Prime and Hulu and Apple.com if you want to download it. And in that movie, Dr. Hans Butzer states that as human beings, we're always looking for safe space. And that is a fundamental tenet of how we deal with our environment every day, every minute of every day, that human beings are always looking for safe space. Well, there's another important component also that I think we've forgotten about in the past 100 or so years, and it's of equally importance, and that is this component of beauty. And beauty ties in with pleasure. And so survival and pleasure are two fundamental components of neurological processing. So for centuries, man has sought to express beauty in art and architecture, and today neuroscience is helping us to understand how and why it plays such an important role in our lives. So the title of my talk today is Design Health, Essential Factors in the, something wrong? All good? Okay. Essential factors in the design process. So it's a fascinating new field of exploration. And I'll start today with two questions. And the first question has two segments. And the question is, why is there so much emphasis today on achieving health and well-being? And how does beauty factor into this? Well, I'll answer that at the end of the talk now, but we're going to go through some points that will allow me to present that answer to you. And then the second question is, how is society being supported in this drive to achieve health and well-being? Well, the answer to that lies in this next slide. Well, it seems that books and magazines and podcasts, seminars, retreats, television programs, life coaches, psychologists, doctors, biologists, on, neuroscientists, they're all focusing on how do we better our lives and improve our general health and well-being. Well, now, given recent advances in science, there's yet another group of professionals poised to become important players in this quest to achieve health and well-being. And I think these are professions that we don't often see associated with medicine or the health and well-being movement, but it's architects and designers. These professions are now poised to assume a position of responsibility unlike any they have ever had before, all due to our new understanding of the brain and how it subliminally supports our lives, especially in regards to the emotion of beauty. Notice the quote on the screen here. This is a profound shift for the profession, that we can have such an important role in the health and well-being of the general public. Beauty is an intuitive emotional response that implies inspiration, wonderment, and curiosity, and at its most fundamental level, a sense of pleasure. Yet this idea has been all but sidelined completely. It's considered, frankly, a notion from a bygone era. That was until recently with the neuro revolution, when science started to uncover the important facts of what beauty and pleasure can mean to our health and well-being. This all began for me back in the 1970s when I was just starting my career. I noticed that there were, frankly, two different kind of general reactions to our projects. Some were called interesting and unique, and others were called beautiful, and they seemed diametrically opposed. When I would look at the general geometries we'd use for the unique projects and the general geometries that we would use for the beautiful projects, somehow there was a fundamental difference there. And so I let that question, I started to answer or ask the question, let it sit there for decades until the neural revolution came along and I started to understand some of the fundamentals that were coming out of science and how it affects our processing of architectural forms. Beauty is a fascinating concept, and philosophers have dealt with this idea for thousands of years. And in recent years, scientists have come to know that there really are two categories of beauty. So there's the beauty that we encode into our brain as we learn. So we are constantly deciding what is pleasurable and what is driving us towards survival. And you're building new neurological circuits. And so your brain is accumulating information and patterns, and it is constantly learning. But that learning is added on top of what you're born with. And that what you're born with is a operating system, if you will, a set of DNA instructions that allow you to enter into the world and become a human being. And those properties are similar across all human beings. And it's about our 10 million year evolution because we share DNA from one person to another. So we know how to breathe, we know how to walk, we know how to kick our arms, we know how to engage with a face when we're born. Well, this is all part of our DNA. Well, there's also other things that we evolved with, which are patterns and scenes from nature primarily that are encoded into our DNA. One of them is this scene that's here on the screen right now, which is known as a broad view. That is a fundamental pattern that all human beings react to when they see it, and the response is, that's beautiful. Well, here's another one, a scene from nature. So flowers, we often engage with gardens and flowers and biophilia because we evolved with it over millions of years. Our brain understands it and it can process it easily, simply, quickly, and without much effort. Here's another scene, a scene from the landscape. So an awe-inspiring scene is also generally referred to as beautiful. Another scene that we're born intuitively knowing about. Also, the wonderment of the stars. That's another scene that humankind evolved with. It's been there from the moment that humans first came up out of the sand and went from quadruped to biped. It hasn't changed since then, so it's not likely to change. And then finally, a broad view with water. That's another important thing. Waterscape is, since we're made up mostly of water, we intuitively understand that it's important to our lives and that we accept it and process it neurologically in a relaxed manner, if you will. And then finally, the beauty of faces. And this is so important. When a child is born, 65% of their neural structure is dedicated to face recognition. When a child opens their eyes from when they first come into the world, they have to find a face in order to survive. The DNA tells them they have to find that face. And the facial pattern is a certain geometric arrangement. Basically, it's 3 dark spots, 2 eyes and a mouth. And the child doesn't see well when they're first born, so this is all fuzzy. And I'm happy there's another talk that I give and I can go into depth with that. But these are just a few of the scenes and pattern types that we are born looking for. And these patterns have a direct relationship with architecture and design via our neurological processing. Well, how does this apply to our projects with the diametrically opposed descriptions and emotions? And how does this relate to health and well-being? Well, it all comes back to how our brains process neurological inputs. Our brains are taxed with processing, get this, 11 million bits of information per second. That's 11 million bits per second of information coming in through your nervous system and being funneled to your brain. only 50 of those are passed on to the portion of your brain which will allow you to take action on something. The rest of it is all processed subliminally. So our brain is taking in a massive amount of information and it's processing it subliminally. And that subliminal processing affects our sense of health and well-being directly. I'm going to go into that here just a little bit more. Well, it turns out that exciting and beautiful, the two terms that I kind of observed that were being used to describe our projects, are related to the two most fundamental emotions of life, and those are survival and pleasure. At the most fundamental level, humankind is genetically predisposed to seek two things: survival and pleasure. Every day, our bodies process billions of actions without us even knowing it, and all of them are geared towards these two categories. An amazing 95% of all actions processed by our brains are intuitive and subconscious, and all are geared towards survival and pleasure. Well, here are 3 examples of how we process pattern types and put them into these categories. So this is, of course, the Salk Institute by Louis Kahn, and I think we talked about some of Kahn's work earlier in the day. Now, this is a really interesting scene, and I'm going to kind of give you a few fundamentals. So I'm going off script here a little bit, but the 3 points that a child looks for when they're first born is an upper left, upper right, and bottom center kind of dark spots. Well, notice the architecture of the building. So upper left, upper right, and bottom center, the bottom center being the fountain, so the small cistern for the fountain. But this is also a bilateral symmetry arrangement, which is a fundamental geometric pattern that all humans respond to because it's a facial pattern. But then beyond that is a broad view. So you have sky, and you can't really see the ocean here because the sunset is obscuring it, but it's a broad view. So you have a combination of upper left, upper right, bottom center, and a broad view and water, all nurturing, this positive rest and relaxation response. Now, when people walk into this courtyard, they stop right there. And it's becomes, this moment of a contemplative reflection. And it's like, I'm in a spot that feels comfortable. And it's because the geometry, the fundamental geometry that your brain is processing is comfortable with it. There's no stress. Your brain's not telling you that it has to remove itself from this scene. Here's another example, but in a slightly different set of problems here. This is a piece of architecture that combines both survival and pleasure. So the survival idea is more what's on top of the old existing building. So the existing building tends to be more in the pleasure category because it's an understandable geometry, whereas the new construction that overlays it is more on the survival side because it's a geometric idea that your brain doesn't understand. So your brain is looking at this and going, what is this? Where do I put it? How does it fit into my neurological scheme? And that additional work that your brain has to go through is called stress. And your brain doesn't like that because it's using up energy that needs to go to other portions of your body. Well, here's another scene that has some similar components. Now, normally a picnic table full of food and wine and cheese next to a body of water and a meadow would be rest and relaxation pleasure response, but it's neutralized by the lightning in the background. Now, what's important to realize here is that these two things combined together, and these last 2 slides are showing that, is that the survival response is 5 to 7 times stronger than the pleasure response because your body has evolved to protect you first and then look for pleasure, after that. Well, so the purpose of showing you these last two slides is to let you know that this 5 to 7 times stronger for survival reaction. So patterns that create a survival response are much, much stronger than pleasure response. Well, this brings me to the next step into aligning our neurological processing with exciting and beautiful. We've been discussing subconscious neurological processing, and the brain has to have inputs to process, and those, of course, are provided by our nervous system. Well, because the discussion is dealing with subconscious subliminal processing, then it's the autonomic nervous system that we're going to talk about right now. And the autonomic nervous system is made up of two constant, inseparable, and very important streams of information, and those being sympathetic and parasympathetic inputs. And these streams of information directly affect our health and well-being, both positively and negatively. Excuse me. Well, sympathetic inputs are considered survival inputs, and these align with exciting. And then conversely, parasympathetic inputs are considered pleasure inputs, and they, of course, align with beautiful, as shown in this graphic. So if a project is described as exciting, then that is a sympathetic response. And if a project is described as beautiful, then it's a parasympathetic response. Well, following from that, there are some very important health attributes to be aware of here. So regarding sympathetic inputs first, it's known as fight or flight. I'm sure most of you have heard of that. Major characteristics of a sympathetic event are stress and anxiety. The event initiates raised heart rate, elevated blood pressure, and narrows your mental focus. So you're focusing in so that you can mobilize all of your muscles and thought processes to protect yourself. So that's what's happening. That's why your focus narrows in during a sympathetic event. So sympathetic events not only make us feel ill, they're a downward pull on our general health and well-being. Now, regarding parasympathetic inputs, which aligns with beauty and pleasure, it's known as rest and relaxation. And the major characteristics of a parasympathetic event are calming, stress relieving, and feeling a sense of well-being. And the event initiates, get this, lower heart rate, lower blood pressure, optimizes critical functions in immunity and cell repair, and expands your mental focus, which is generally when epiphanies and insights happen, and it creates a general sense of well-being. Here's something that's really pretty amazing to reflect upon. For those of you that meditate, it's parasympathetic thought that you're trying to access during a meditation session. So literally, you can create the same response from using the right architectural patterns and colors and textures that you would achieve during a meditation session. And I think science has well defined the benefits for meditation. So parasympathetic inputs not only make us feel good, they boost the general state of our health. The core message here is that our subconscious subliminal brain is making decisions for us all day, every day, based on survival and pleasure patterns. And there are significant health ramifications to the patterns we encounter, both positive and negative. So architects and designers and planners, because our designs are made up of patterns, can play an important role in society. It is imperative that we design for parasympathetic and beautiful inputs to support the balanced health of our nervous system. Well, this information led us to biology and psychology. A healthy nervous system achieves balance when the flow of sympathetic and parasympathetic inputs are in balance. It's known as homeostasis. A life that's all sympathetic and stressful is out of balance, as we well know. Well, likewise, a life that's all pleasure and parasympathetic is equally out of balance. So here's the key statement. Stress makes us stronger, and pleasure mitigates the negative components of stress. It is literally a balancing act where one input complements the other. A good example of this is a stressful day at work followed by relaxing in a favorite chair and enjoying a beautiful view, thus allowing your nervous system to rebalance itself. In a recent article in the New York Times, a leading research doctor at Columbia University placed homeostasis as the number one most important component for health and well-being. While applying this same balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic to design, we have this diagram indicating the importance of the utilization of design patterns that generate both sympathetic and parasympathetic reactions. Concisely, this advocates that it is essential that both exciting and beautiful elements be combined in a design to achieve the proper balance, to reinforce health and well-being. Now, keep in mind, as discussed earlier, sympathetic events are much, much stronger. So it doesn't take many of those patterns to counterbalance all rest and relaxation. Here's a good example of a classically designed space. This is bilateral symmetry, so it's easy for your brain to understand. But there are some unique patterns in here, but it doesn't overwhelm the overall concept of the space. So basically, it is about 20% of uniqueness versus and curiosity, which is something Madeline talked about a few minutes ago. Curiosity is a really important component, but it has to be balanced against geometries that your brain can recognize easily. And here's a diagram that shows an unbalanced accentuation on exciting and sympathetic patterns results in a diagram such as this, which leads to increased stress and a compromised immune and cardiovascular system, which can lead ultimately to catastrophic health ramifications, including hypertension, high blood pressure, heart disease, stroke, neurological inflammation, and cancer are all connected to stress. This in turn affects our DNA and the longevity term of our life. Clearly, a situation that we should strive to avoid. I know that most of you in the audience this afternoon are committed to beauty, and this is such important work you are doing, more important than you might realize. You are literally supporting and improving the overall health and well-being of society and your clients as well. Today, stress is at an all-time high in society, and some medical professionals estimate that up to 80% of visits to a physician's office have a stress component. We are coping with stress 24/7, it seems, and that is why the general public is always seeking ways to achieve health and well-being in order to counterbalance the stress that's in our life. Well, as just outlined, an effective antidote to this stress is to create parasympathetic environments that have a broad emphasis and stress relieving component. And this broad emphasis will propel architects and designers to a new and profoundly important role in the health and well-being movement. And all of this is supported by a now new understanding that beauty is important to our lives, and it is tied directly to our health and well-being. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Don. It was really, really great. And we have Ilsa coming up next.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Tara, for the introduction. We're going from big grand spaces to small ones. This is a talk on setting and accessibility in psychedelic assisted therapy spaces and exploration. And so I'm looking at interior spaces designed for psychedelic assisted therapy. I went into this thinking that I would be talking more with people who might be conducting psychedelic assisted therapy or research. And since I'm not sure of that, I'll give a short explanation of what I'm talking about. Psychedelic compounds are compounds that amplify what is in our subconscious and sensory apparatus, and there are several classes Mostly we're talking about classic psychedelics like psilocybin, which is the compound that makes magic mushroom psychedelic, or LSD. Some people would include MDMA as well, which is an entactogen. You could even include perhaps something like ketamine. And right now we have several research projects that have looked at classic psychedelics and MDMA as a potential treatment for people who have depression or PTSD or substance abuse disorders. Most of these treatments share a lot in common, probably because they grew out of the same research or culture or number of people who were looking at it. They tend to situate the treatment within some conventional talk type therapy and then have discrete 2 or 3 sessions where you are given the compound and given relatively non-directive type therapy where you're left to go inward. There's often music and you're encouraged to close your eyes or wear a blindfold, and you will have people periodically check in with you. And the spaces are designed around those sorts of things. I'll start also with describing set and setting, an overview of set and setting. Those who are familiar with psychedelic compounds might recognize the phrase. It was popularized by Leary, even if he didn't invent it. Set is what is going on inside a person, and setting is what's going on outside. Things that might be considered set are things like mood and emotion, prior knowledge or beliefs, physical health, how good your sleep has been, or whether you're in pain or not. And setting can include a lot of things, including physical features of the surrounding, like the furniture that's in there, the lighting, what it smells like, any artwork that's there, and also social context and features of all the people around you, the configuration of where people are standing, their social identities, like their gender or ethnicity, and whether you know those people or not. All of those things are part of setting. Now, if you think about where you are right now, you might be in this space in person, you might be in some other place online. Observe your space, look around, and think about what you're experiencing with all senses. I know that since we've had a slideshow, it sort of gives vision an advantage, and it's a very bossy sense, but explore outward to think about where does light come from as well, and what do you smell? Sometimes you have to leave a space and come back. Don't do it now, but to realize that there's actually an odor to a place. Where are ambient sounds coming from? Sounds from within a space or outside? Are there art? Are there objects there? Paintings, photographs, things like that. These are all things that can contribute to setting, to an interior space. Now, this can connect to accessibility, making a space accessible to and comfortable to all people, including people with disabilities, which I would argue as we all age is going to include a lot of people. I sometimes say we're temporarily able and then we're not. Some of those things are, of course, general things. And of course, the most general thing of all is to ask the community you're dealing with and ask any participant or patient you're dealing with for what they need. But some of these things, you don't, at least I would say you don't actually need research to confirm that you want to have facilities that are accessible to people if they're using a mobility device, or you want to have navigation easy for people who may be using those devices or who can't see and are navigating around. You want to be able to address sensitivities to light or sound or fragrance. And there's nothing specific about psychedelic assisted therapy. Those are just things that you might want to think about. However, there may be some things that are related to psychedelic assisted therapy. And as I've mentioned, there's a general agreement on the kind of space that is expected. And I would also argue there's some resistance to wanting to change those things based on if it's not broken, why fix it? Here's some examples of spaces, and this was clipped from a paper that inspired me and sort of sent me on this path. The paper is by Okano et al., published in 2022, and they were classifying elements of setting, in this case within MDMA-assisted therapy. And if you look at these spaces, you can see some commonalities. There's either a central couch or bed where people can sit or lie down. Light tends to be indirect in floor lamps. There's artwork. These are things that are shared. There are also some things you can't see there, like often ways of presenting music. They often have art supplies present. And some of those things are, as I said, specific to a psychedelic assisted therapy space. There's often an interest in having artwork that is either nature focused, containing nature, or elements that are considered spiritual or transcendent. There's often some form of presenting music, either through earphones or speakers. I think I put in lighting because it's something I think about. Unfortunately, I don't hear lots about it in discussing the spaces, but there's a sense that you don't want harsh overhead lights and you're looking for lights that are more like the ones that you see in a living room and not a clinic. So these are elements that we think about within a psychedelic assisted therapy space. I guess I'm first of all going to attend to the idea of having nature within the space and how you might do this with visual arts and sculpture, ceramics, but also just things that are aesthetic about the space. You might also think about fabric and textiles that are featured in the space. Often there's a preference for blankets that are soft and you can wrap around you, because a number of psychedelic substances can change how you may feel hot or cold, and this way you can deal with that, or you may want to touch something that's soft or different. And scent and fragrance, which really hasn't been addressed a lot in the literature, but people could have something like plants or incense or even just an open window. Sound and music has been given some attention in the literature, which I'll address soon. So these are the sorts of things that you might find in a space. Addressing nature, there has been some survey studies, and I believe at least one observational and also in an experimental study where nature-themed material or experiencing nature heightened a sense of mystical experience, and this itself is connected with improvement in either improvements in the experience itself or in a symptom to a condition that's being treated. So how might we bring nature indoors, assuming of course the space is indoors? You could have artwork, you could have field recordings or videos, you could have access to gardens or courtyards if that's allowed in your space. I would say to make it accessible, though, to everyone, including people who might not see everything or hear everything, is to think in terms of multiple multiple channels, multiple senses. So you could have visual and audible and olfaction, all of those things involved if possible, and even the physical presence of nature within the space. Other things in setting that have been studied so far, as well as the nature-themed video and nature, have included music and having eyes open or closed. Here are 3 different studies that actually looked at elements of setting. One looked at the presence of nature. In this case, they operationalized, that is, they made it present and specific and concrete by making a video that people watched, or by presenting people with a video or standard instructions for meditation, and found that the nature themed video reduced anxiety and also reduced an acceleration in heart rate and blood pressure. And in this study, they either assigned people to see the video, the nature themed video, or the standard instructions. That's called a between group study. The other 2 studies used a within subjects or within group design, which means that everyone was exposed to all of the different conditions available. In the second study, people either listened to a playlist of Western classical music or overtone-based music, which apparently referred to music from instruments that had prominent overtones in their notes and that tend to have longer prolonged notes. In this case, people had 3 sessions with psilocybin, 1 was with the Western classical music, one was with the overtone-based music. And they found that during the overtone-based music, there's an increase in sense of a mystical experience, and there wasn't any increase in bad effects, and more people chose the overtone-based playlist when they had a chance to select that playlist. Finally, this was a study in healthy volunteers, and it was comparing placebo with LSD, injected LSD at that, and they looked at eyes open versus eyes closed and found that the closed eye was associated with an increase in brain changes that were associated with increased drug effects, and music with LSD increased the reported visual imagery and positive mood. So these are ways that you could measure specific things in setting. And I bring this up, believe me, this has a point, and the point is, how can we think about setting and accessibility? First of all, we want to think about what part of setting we're looking at, and then we might want to think about how we investigate its importance. So ways that we might do this are first observation, observing the actual psychedelic therapy or other situations and see what happens. So you can ask people what happened afterwards in a survey. You can have a naturalistic trial where you might find one or more conditions that represent the difference in setting you want to look at and compare them, but you're not assigning people to either group. And you can use the between group or within group trials that I mentioned earlier, either assigning people to one and only one of those setting conditions, or everyone gets each of the conditions, and then you could also compare them to a standard treatment or group. And these are all ways of taking that element of setting that you're curious about and seeing, well, does it make a difference? And if it does, we can go further. Now, we have, at least in the literature, there are things that just don't change. And I think, as someone who does have a visual impairment, I do think, for instance, is artwork and visual arts contributing to an improvement in condition? Or thinking of people who are deaf or hard of hearing, is music absolutely essential? So is it necessary to replace or amplify something that not everyone can experience? And maybe the answer is no, we don't need to. But if it is contributing something, then the next question is, what could we do within the design to replace that key thing? Could we use another sensory route like fragrance or scent? Could we use dance or motion in place of music? I don't know the answer. So that's what I'm asking how we'd find out. You would want to identify a setting element and then specify or create a clear understanding, a clear representation of that thing that you're looking at, like, say, music, present or absent, or something that's more along a continuum, for instance, discrete versus continuum. How much nature do you need in your nature theme, or different colors of lighting? Then can that thing be removed or replaced? Because maybe some things can't be. Then consider how you're going to measure that, both in terms of subjective reaction to the setting element or its absence or change, and any outcome that you want to look at in the case of treating people who have conditions. Do they improve? Does the improvement increase? Does it not increase? And that's how you might set up a sort of study for this. Here's just sort of an example that I've thought about. Is music contributing something to the psychedelic assisted therapy experience? So the first question, I would argue, has not actually been answered. There are observational studies and naturalistic trials, and even trials like the one by Strickland and colleagues, where they looked at overtone-based versus Western classical music. But people have not addressed the basic issue of whether the presence of music or absence is a key contributor to, say, positive outcomes in psychedelic assisted therapy. So the answer to that question, at least as far as I know right now, is we don't know how key it is. So that's the first thing to figure out. Then if it turns out it really is contributing something important, and we know that not everyone is going to have access to that sensory input, is there something we can add that will be similar to it? Is there a viable replacement? You know, for instance, for tactile sensation or dancing. But then, you know, to get to that point, you'd have to look at using that setting element. So this is just looking at or unpacking what we, I guess we, meaning people who are interested in psychedelic assisted therapy and maybe in internal spaces, what we think are necessities, and also maybe rethinking them so that they can be more accessible to everyone who is within those spaces. And thanks to all of you for attending and listening. And I'm grateful to Dara Cunningham to invite me to this space in Conscious Denver. I'm not a designer and I'm not even a therapist. I am a psychologist of an experimental psychologist, and I hope this stirred up the pot of ideas for future research.
Right. Thank you, Ilsa. Okay, and next up, we have Megan Mazzacco, and then Claudia.
Hey, Dara, thanks so much. So hi, thank you so much for being here. Thanks, Dara. I'm Megan Mazzocco. I am not an architect, but for the majority of my career, I was senior editor at Architectural Products, Architectural SSL about solid state lighting and LEDs in the built environment, and net zero buildings. So during my architectural design journalism career, I reported on everything from curtains to curtain wall. And I met a lot of amazing people in this design community. And so I'm really excited to be here as a WELL AP and a WELL faculty. I call myself a consciousness expansion officer. So that's another fantastic part about being in presentation alongside Sarika and Dawn with beauty, and then Ilsa with her experimental psychology and consciousness expansion journeys. But my practice, Wellbeing by Design, is actually a coaching practice that is a series of evidence-based design frameworks to design your life and work within your parameters to thrive. So besides a certified coach, I'm also a certified health coach, and I teach reverse biological aging. So no, I'm not one of those, tech bros or biohackers. Everything I talk about is all based in lifestyle, nutrition, and movement. So guess what? The number one thing I like to talk to about my client, I like to talk about with my clients is first, it is sleep. And so that brings us to my presentation, which is Sleep and the City. And normally it's called Connecting Rest and Relationships, but for the theme of the Conscious Cities Festival, it is Regrounding in Rest and Relationships. And why rest and relationships? Because the quality of our lives is the quality of our relationships. And the quality of relationships that we are capable of having and we have the capacity to enjoy and facilitate is actually dependent on the amount of sleep that we're getting and how we are able to show up. So I talk about this a lot. I love talking about sleep. So thank you so much for letting me come here and talk about sleep and the city. And so why sleep? Well, first of all, the amount of sleep that people have gotten over the last 100 years has plummeted. Obviously, with the introduction of the electric light bulb, and then now with these smart devices that we all think we should be on all the time. So not only is that causing an arousal response, and not the good kind, it's also exposing us to the blue-green light that lowers and blocks our ability to produce melatonin, which is a hormone that helps us to get sleepy and fall asleep. In fact, the World Health Organization has declared sleep deprivation an epidemic in every single industrialized country in the world. And so it's an epidemic. It is a public health crisis. but somehow it's kind of invisible. According to the CDC in this country, I don't know, do we still have a CDC? I don't know right now. I haven't checked in lately. So the CDC in this country confers that 1 in 3 adults is sleepy. So if you're there in person, or maybe even on the Brady Bunch Zoom, look to your left, look to your right. One of you is likely sleep deprived. And just to keep this also in mind, there are 7 different kinds of rest that you need to get in order to achieve restorative sleep. And if you have any questions while I'm talking, go ahead and put them in the chat. Thank you. So when we're talking about designing cities for sleep, like at the district scale, at the building scale, we're not even just talking about sleep, the physical rest, the passive physical rest part of sleep. We're talking about all of these different kinds of rest: mental, emotional, social, spiritual, creative, and sensory, which some of my co-presenters have covered. Sleep is a biological imperative, and they only just figured this out recently, I would say 2019, that we have this lymphatic system, and it only works when we're in deep sleep, and our brain cells actually shrink, and the cerebral spinal fluid comes in and it cleans out all of the neurotoxins and the plaques that are associated with poor cognitive health outcomes, and not just short-term cognitive health outcomes, but long-term cognitive health outcomes such as Alzheimer's. And I think Don was covering some of that in his presentation, that, the Big Apple, the city that never sleeps, is going to need more than an apple a day to keep the doctor away, because, sleep deprivation and chronic sleep deprivation can lead to such costly health conditions. So again, cardiovascular disease, obesity, metabolic disorders, and insulin resistance. So again, that is why I'm talking about sleep, because it is a public health crisis. Another part about sleep, just a few stats. I already mentioned 1 in 3 adults are sleep deprived. And the recommendations for doctors now are to screen all patients under 65 for anxiety and depression, which is caused by inadequate sleep. 51% of adults feel sleepy 3 to 7 days a week. There is $136 billion lost per year from fatigue. So the cause of absenteeism, presenteeism, and healthcare costs, which are associated with lowered immune function, and anxiety, which are both associated with lack of sleep. That is because when we don't sleep, we wake up sleep deprived, which raises the hormone and neurotransmitter norepinephrine. So it raises your blood sugar, it raises your blood pressure, and it increases your heart rate. So there's this sense of, I'm not okay. I'm not okay. There must be something wrong. So imagine 30% of us walking around totally not fit for human interaction because we have this low level of anxiety. And this low level of anxiety can also lead to depression if it's chronic. So who is advocating for sleep besides me, this crazy well-being health coach, health nut? The International Well-Building Institute, and they have 6 of their 10 well-building tenants address sleep and circadian health. Circadian health is addressed specifically, and then you'll see the other 5. I am also a Be Well, Lead Well certified guide, and Be Well, Lead Well Pulse is an assessment that views the effectiveness of leadership through the lens of well-being. And one of the main 6 tenets of the Be Well, Lead Well Pulse is fuel, which means how you sleep, how you move, how you breathe, and how you eat. So again, leaders and cutting edge organizations are really zeroing in and narrowing, focusing in on sleep. March is National Sleep Awareness Month. So thank you for including me in this timely presentation. The Western medical model, unfortunately, deprioritizes sleep. Doctors only get about 1 to 5 hours of sleep training, and they also, in their training, don't seem to sleep very much. I learned as an architecture and design journalist, hanging out with a lot of architects across the world and across time zones, they don't sleep very much either. So I'm going for the low hanging fruit here. I think that the first thing that needs to happen in order for people to become consciously expanded and contemplative is just commit to getting enough sleep. The AIA is now going to be involved in sleep for public health because they finally, in their June 2024 convention, voted for Resolution 1, which pledges to embrace health and well-being policies and research for architecture's impact on human health and well-being. So you can see all of the well-building tenets and how they tie in with sleep. You know, light definitely ties in with sleep. We were talking about that earlier. Community and, you know, not feeling lonely, feeling a sense of belonging. That's so important as well. Mind, that again is, you know, mental well-being. And if you're not well slept, you are not mentally at your optimal levels. And then here is the Be Well, Lead Well assessment circle where you can see the fuel as one of the 6 elements that are measured in this leadership assessment. And then because it is Sleep Awareness Month, this is a message from your National Sleep Foundation about being your best slept self, because it's true. We're really not fit to be interacting or creative or driving a car if we're not well slept. So what is going on? Why do we have a sleep deprivation epidemic globally and nobody's talking about it? When it comes to sleep and circadian health, unfortunately, versus the 24/7 city, the city is winning. So how can we design and encourage sleep and circadian health in cities? Because so many people are affected by it, and women and the children and the elderly and anyone who is differently abled, highly sensitive people, neurodivergent populations, anyone who experiences difficulty regulating their nervous system. So like Don was talking about, we're taking in 11 billion bits of information a second, and we're, you know, filtering it out with our peripheral vision and, you know, focusing on the rest. And to think that we're all doing that not well slept is crazy. Anyone living, okay, first responders and second and third shift workers. I wanted to touch on that really because the World Health Organization has declared second and third shift work as a known carcinogen. And then anyone living in or through extreme heat. And the reason I wanted to mention that and climate change is because the optimal temperature for sleep is 65 degrees. So there's a design consideration when it comes to the comfort element of the well building standard. So what are barriers to sleep, especially in cities? Light pollution, obviously you see interior light and you see exterior light, but also remember screens. Noise pollution from transportation. There's actually, well, there used to be a transportation noise map available, the government website, and you could see where the loudest places in the country are. But that's the noise that you can hear. There's also sound and vibration from building and mechanical elements that if they're not properly engineered and absorbed and the underlayment is there, it actually is disruptive to human health. There's also the climate change and extreme heat, which I just mentioned, and our car-centric sedentary lifestyle, which really doesn't give us much of a civic life, a sense of belonging or safety, to a sense of belonging to place and safety where we live. And then also the sedentary lifestyle, we need to move to dissipate the cortisol that is built up during the day. Don was saying, like, these exciting or stressful events are much more impactful on our neurology and our homeostasis than having a beauty event, right? It takes 3 positive events to neutralize that one negative event. So think of that when you're moving, you're doing your daily movement practice, you're really dissipating that cortisol that has been released during those stress events, and it helps you to sleep. So what are some antidotes in the city to environmental sleep disruptions and toxic arousal? This building, you wouldn't guess it's a turtle crossing, but it makes me laugh that we consider the circadian health of baby turtles in order to design and illuminate beautifully and eco-sensitively a parking garage. So this parking garage is in coastal Florida, and the LED lights on it will change and dim to a color that will not attract the baby turtles to crawl in the wrong direction when they should be crawling into the ocean. So as egocentric as human beings are, how are we not thinking about our circadian health? So what can we learn from this parking garage and the baby turtles? We need dark sky lighting ordinances. We want safety and wayfinding in cities. We want places for gathering and not just, certain groups attracted to certain spaces, but we want multi-generational, intergenerational spaces where everyone in the community can mix and meet and feel a sense of community and belonging, because that is also very important to sleep. We need green spaces and what I call midscapes or the mid doors. So that's really those soft, verdant edges to hardscapes. We need biodiversity, and we need to address noise, light pollution, and movement and play. And then finally, there's some smart building technology that I actually talked to Siemens about a couple years ago. And what they had for a client in Japan was actually if somebody was in the building at risk of overwork, because that's a thing in Japan, is death by overwork. If they log on to their computer or the server, the building will tell them to please go home and go to bed. So that is how important sleep is and how important smart technology is. Even if that feels invasive or intrusive, it is an imperative. So you can see here, noise pollution is no match for a botanical garden. There is a hardscape here. It is glass, it is cement, it is brick. People are trying to live, work, learn, play in this space, and it's going to be completely reverberating every single transportation noise. But then it's like, well, we need a city, we need buildings, we need a coffee shop called Insomnia. And how are we going to get a botanical garden like space to absorb all the noise and to filter the air if we need a city? Here is striking a balance. You see this beautiful vertical green wall, and it is doing all the things to create beauty, biophilia, and visual complexity, which again, it neutralizes that negative arousal response and that stress, and then it puts you into a state of healing, relaxation, and maybe even curiosity and wonder, because there are some different scales and textures and plants sticking out here. And then you can see this is an activation of an alleyway. So there's no more dead spaces, there's no more dark spaces or unactivated spaces. And it's a place that is a multi-generational, intergenerational gathering space with dark sky lighting, pedestrian-friendly wayfinding, and then it creates a civic life. And again, this is an example of a midscape or a mid doors, right? So that the other part of it that you see here, there is some hardscape, right? There's quite a bit, but a thing I wanted to readdress from the climate and the heat island effect is that if you use granite instead of cement and pavement, it will help to mitigate the heat island effect. So I just wanted to touch on hardscapes for a quick second there. So at the district and building scale, we should consider dark sky and dimming light in evening to reduce light pollution and to stop suppressing our melatonin, because that is precious. We need architects to think about robust openings in windows and doors and curtain walls so that it really is an acoustic barrier, and also underlayments that are absorbing the building and the transportation vibration that might be nearby in a large city. We should plan for pocket parks and the High Line. I love that somebody had that in their presentation. Urban gardens, midscapes, and Bosco Verticale, which is the building in Milan, Italy, in the Porto Nuova neighborhood. It actually has balconies coming off of all sides of the buildings that are full of trees and shrub plantings all the way up the building. That is for absorbing acoustics. It's for filtering air pollution and also for ecological biodiversity. Gardens attract our intergenerational spaces, and actually people whose movement practice is gardening, they tend to have better quality sleep. And as Don had said before, this really creates the beauty and the visual complexity to trigger the relaxation response, which is healing. We really need to push more for walkable and bike-friendly 10-minute cities, because not only does that reduce the noise pollution from transportation, it increases your daily movement practice, it creates a civic life, and it reduces air pollution. And it gives a sense of belonging and safety at that scale, and familiarity with people on your path. And then the International Well Building Institute proves the case for healthy buildings in its Investing in Health Pays Back research report. They report increases in office productivity and in real estate value. So you can search that up if you're curious. And then finally, just some inspiring images to kind of give you a real visceral sense of, what should we be focusing on and designing our cities for. When I talk about designing cities for sleep and sleep in the city, we really, would you rather stroll through here to do your errands or walk through what looks like a used car parking lot? And then finally, I just got this in the mail recently, and this week, Gensler's NVIDIA in Santa Clara is a space to enhance well-being and boost creative thinking. So again, you see this outdoors, immersed in nature, in beauty, and also getting the last light of the sun, which will tell the body's circadian clock that it is time for winding down and sleep. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I want you to go out there and rest like you mean it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I think we have a question and answer session now. And then also, if you ever want to tune into Architects as Healers, Buildings as Medicine, that is a Clubhouse broadcast that we do weekly on Clubhouse. And you can contact me at my email address. Thank you so much. Thanks, Dara.
Thank you, Megan. It's really good. Really interesting. And yes, we actually have Claudia Folska. Yes, your logo's on it. Okay. So is everybody here? Like we're all connected together? Do I look here? Yeah, they can see your video screen, and we'll just see if. So you might be wondering what's wrong. By the way, thank you very much, Dara, for putting this together. It's really an honor and a privilege to be a part of this distinguished panel, to be quite honest with you. And y'all are speaking my language. But I wanted to let you know that I'm blind, and I've been blind for about 95% of my life. And what I do have, is light perception. So
what they call it now is the final stage of vision, having finger count acuity. When I went to school, and let me just say, technology is our friend, guys, right? We use extended cognition by writing things in journals and books, and we've been doing that for a long time. We use pens, we sit in chairs, we have lighting systems. So we've been using technology as we go along. And I think we need to really consider how to embrace this advancement, this exponential advancement in technology that we're looking at today with generative artificial intelligence, large language models, computer vision, computer learning, and so on. My area of research has to do with cognitive science and architecture planning, and thinking about how blind people navigate the built environment and the implication it has to neuroplasticity. So I don't remember who was talking about, maybe it was Ilsa, the blind or the sight and the visual aspect of a person's brain hogging up all of your system there in your brain. And it does, it's the largest part of your brain. But what is it doing if it's not collecting any data? I was wondering about that. And that's where your neuroplasticity really comes into play. And that's the recruitment part. So I'm blind, I'm walking around, and my visual cortex is now being usurped by different sensory modalities in my brain, like my olfactory or my auditory system. And you hear things very quickly. It's so close to your brain, and the auditory system is really important. But at the same time, just like thinking about our well-being and finding our homeostasis, we need to consider, this flight or fight, or, because I gotta say, honestly, when I would come home from school, I'd be like, can I have a martini? I was so stressed out just in getting home. And why? Because I had to travel on public transportation. My life has always been spent on public transportation. And I didn't grow up in New York. I grew up in Southern California. California in general is a car country. You could call Colorado as a car state as well. And then we're talking today about well-being and transportation systems, multimodal transit systems, electric, autonomous vehicles. And, how is that affecting anybody or all of us? And how are we going to manage living in a place and spaces where we're required, not asked, required to use both the digital world as we move through the built environment simultaneously? And so I think that my cortisol levels have been through the roof for a very long time. And part of that is because when I'm trying to do my wayfinding in a complex, multisensory overload environment, whether it's sirens, it's people, bicycle. And by the way, speaking of bicycles, I rode a bike across America in 1 month. So I know what I'm talking about when I talk about bicycles. I've also ridden a bike from Pakistan to China on the Karakoram Highway to the Kunjra Pass, the highest paid pass in the world. And I'm just saying, how people are riding their bikes today around town or their little scooters and dropping them all over the cities is part of my problem. And it's a lot of people's problems. I had a professor on my advisory committee. He was on the Boulder campus. He got run over by a guy on a scooter, and let alone just dropping them here and there. Now, when we think about designing these places and spaces, especially our transportation systems, it's really imperative to include people when you're at the idea stage, right? All people. So you'll see my logo here. It's a circle, it's Greek for all together. And then we have a blue color, that's a PMS 293, which is the blue color that we've all habituated to in America for denoting what is a disability access kind of thing. But everybody isn't in a wheelchair and everybody isn't blind, but everybody loves a slope. Get rid of the stairs, right? So my little smiley face did not have a stroke. Some people said, Lynn didn't have a stroke. It's just a slope to scale at the ADA. And speaking of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, that's over 30 years old. People are still trying to figure out how to make it work. All of those rules for design and building and architecture, that's the baseline. It is not the sky is the limit. I think about blue sky ideals. Think about the slope. Or even, I was also on the RTD board, so I had the privilege of serving 2 full 4-year terms on the RTD board of directors. We have these raised platforms in Denver, and they're pretty narrow, and then there is switchback, and they come back, and then you can get onto the train, the light rail train in the city. And they were rebuilding some of these platforms. And I said, while you're rebuilding them, make that turnaround a little easier, because as it is right now, if you're in a wheelchair, you go up, you turn right, you go back. You have to back down backwards. I mean, who wants to back down on a ramp and think about your sense of safety, not just falling over? Or suppose a curb cut. Great thing. Everybody loves a curb cut today, right? Well, if you don't have it at the right slope, the right degrees, and you're in a wheelchair, you can fall over right back into the street. So there is a lot of excitement. It's just a lot of excitement going on for us folks with disabilities. And then we think about safe streets and complete streets and designing smart cities. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. One thing I think that is important to note, and I just discovered this in some research I was doing, we have something at the United States Department of Transportation called the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. Well, we used to. I don't know what it is doing now, but that is where they hold all the information about traffic accidents for years and years and years, decades. It's called FARS, Fatal Accident Reporting Systems, and you can look it up online. And they have granular detail about all of the accidents that have been going on in every city, every place in the United States. They don't count people with disabilities. So when you have investments of billions of dollars into building safe streets and complete streets, you don't even know if you're doing it right, because you don't count people with disabilities, not at a local, state, or federal level. And I know that because of my research, but I called the librarian over there, and she's like, yeah, we're not counting you people. So 40,000 people a year die on our streets across America by human error mostly. And then we're concerned about autonomous vehicles not being safe. Well, think about that. 40,000 people a year in the United States are being killed in traffic accidents. People are being hit. And I was just thinking the other day, I know 7 blind people who have been hit by a car in an intersection. Now, if we don't have those traffic cameras, the blind person isn't going to be able to say, yeah, it was a red pickup at 250 or 150, F-150. No, they don't know. They know that they were hit. And it's pretty hard to report that. So anyway, I'm going to give you a videotape. So a couple years ago, actually 14 years ago, a colleague of mine named Matt Frost, who's a graduate from the Tisch School of Film, did a documentary on my research called Getting There. It's so old, it's great to look at, because what they were using for navigation systems, you might recall this is so ancient, the TomTom, remember that? I think you would put this in the trunk of your car or something, and maybe you could get some information about, like, I grew up with a Thomas Guide. My family used this Thomas Guide. And then also the technology I used in my undergraduate program was an 8-track cassette player. So we have come a long way. And I really do appreciate all the digital technology that we have. Also, I will tell you, the smartphone that came out in 2007 was never accessible. In fact, they didn't consider it. Not the Google people, not the Apple people. Now, how is that possible? We just forgot about us. And this is the issue. We are suffering from another othering. And people with disabilities know that very well. We'll think about you after. It's like building a skyscraper, okay? And then thinking about showing it off at the grand opening and saying, oops, sorry, guys, I forgot the elevator, but let me throw one on the outside and it'll get to kind of close. That's not really what I think is acceptable. And so when we think about building spaces and places for people, it's all people from the very beginning. Here's a piece, an excerpt of the documentary Getting There by my friend Matt Frost, and you can get a better idea of what I'm talking about. You want me to go there? You can come over here. Oh,
Okay.
uh-huh.
Yeah. You want to switch places?
Okay, no, just press play. Just the next key, it should open.
Okay, it says getting there and then
Play.
see it play. Oh, okay. Now it's starting, but I need to share this. Okay. The joys of technology.
The navigation that most of us do these days is curated. We're not out in the wilderness, finding our way with a compass and using the stars as our guide. We're driving on roads, we're walking on sidewalks, we're using man-made signs and signals to find our way. And even if you're not traveling that far, for instance, if you're going somewhere within the limits of the city or town that you live in, you're still surrounded by markers that show you where you are and where to go.
For example, take a right at the end of the road and go straight for a bit. Cross to the other side of the street and climb the steps to the subway platform. Get on the Manhattan-bound platform and take the J train into the city.
Speaker is a Caucasian man. The camera is now zooming through the streets and railways of Manhattan.
Once you're over the bridge, get off at Canal Street and switch to the 6. Then ride it a couple of stops before remembering that the 6 doesn't run to the subway stop you need. Get out and wait for the 4 or the 5. Then ride those to the last stop in Manhattan. Once you're out of the platform, follow the signs for the park. And then you've arrived at your destination.
Empty street with graffiti on the walls.
Now let's complicate it a bit. Can you do that same trip with your eyes closed?
Screen goes black.
Would you know when it was okay to cross? Would you know where to cross to get to the station? Once in the station, how would you know which train you were getting on, or which train you were going to take? How would you know where to get off, or which direction you should go once you were back up on the street? What would be left to guide you?
Blue screen with white octagon and blue question mark.
Hey, Dara, there's no sound. People on the Zoom, we can't hear.
Yeah.
My talk?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry about that.
I have to start all over? Never mind, don't worry.
Sorry about that.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
we were sharing system audio and then it didn't switch back to just person. So
So what shall I do now?
I'm sorry, if you want to repeat what you just said
From what point?
from right after we stopped the video.
Oh, gee.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to remember. I'm not exasperated. Okay. So it's like a lot to say in a little bit of time, but everybody's together again?
Yes, they can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, great. Because you're not here and I can't hear that. You can just don't nod your head, you know? So if you consider how people who are blind or even in wheelchairs, you know, a person in a wheelchair is going to need more time to cross the street because they need to get over the arc of the road. And so we think about smart city design, smart transportation, electric autonomous vehicles. Where are we, folks who are permanently transit dependent, going to fit into this conversation? And do we have a seat at the table to suggest and provide information that's really great? I mean, we're all subject matter experts on this, to integrate into these new solutions using generative artificial intelligence and computer visioning and computer language models, large language models, and so on. So in an effort to solve these problems, and it's kind of a make or buy decision, I'm going to make it and you guys buy it. Oh, well, anyway, thanks. It's good to have a little feedback there. But this is going to be free for anybody that wants to use it as an app. The app is a mobile application. It's called the Golden Key. You download the Golden Key and you unlock your complete trip. Now, this basic technology, I mean, it's not so basic, but the primary part of this technology is designed for wayfinding in complex environments, indoors and outdoors, kind of like you get used to the GPS system outdoors, which is fairly good, but there is nothing indoors, okay? And we have solved that problem. So yay, we have partnered with Carnegie Mellon University. The folks that are doing this work are postdoc computer science geniuses that are here. So what I'm going to share with you is a prototype of our new technology. It also shows you points of interest. So imagine when you go to a shopping mall, and I did this, and this happens in airports too. So shopping malls, I went with my sighted friend because I knew, this is a nightmare. I mean, I couldn't even find somebody that would work there or anybody would know anything that's anywhere. So I take my sighted friend and I want to go to Ann Taylor. She can't even find the directory. So finally we find the directory and it says Ann Taylor near Macy's. You know, these places are huge. Where near? Same with an airport. I want to go to the American Airlines lounge. Yeah, it's near gate C35 and you're at Dallas Fort Worth. That's a massive airport. So you know what? When it's so difficult, people just don't even bother. It's kind of this Winnie the Pooh effect. Oh, bother. I don't want to go there. It's too hard. Think about your friends who are aging, older adults. Now they have to navigate both the digital world and the built environment simultaneously, and it's impossible to remember even what to tell Siri. So we need to have a smoother natural language voice interface. And you're going to see that this is what's going on here. The gentleman who is narrating or actually conducting the pilot is Oscar Romero Lopez. And then the voiceover is the natural language. Of course, just know that these can be in any language. And when we get farther along, maybe some celebrity voices who could be fun. So, but this is just your basic application, and it really could be anywhere. And interfacing with your smart communities, like slowing down the traffic signal cycle so that if you're in a wheelchair and you need a little bit more time, from 10 seconds to 15 to cross safely, and then feed that information back to the driver, because there's already in most cars 2,000 data points that are leaving that car going out, telling the so-called smart city, we call it connected vehicle to everything technology, to say, oh, okay, well, unsafe roads, traffic congestion, so on and so forth. So it needs to come all the way back and into the pedestrians. If you really want to have safe pedestrian environments, all this information that's out there for the cars, the connected vehicle, needs to go to the pedestrian. And I call that CV to the X is less than P to the MR, pedestrian to the multiple realities. Okay, let's see this golden key.
All right. Okay, so let's share
And this does need to be seen. I mean, I think
the
so.
video. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sighted people like to see things.
How do I get to the closest bus stop?
And share system audio.
How do I get to the closest bus stop?
Let me guide you. Let's cross the intersection when the diagonal crosswalk is safe. Turn slightly right and walk 78 feet. There is construction work on your left. This is a bus stop located at 4th Avenue and Craig Street serving outbound downtown directions. The buses that stop here are 61A, 61B, 61C, 61D, 67, and 69.
I will take the 61D bus. How much does the bus ticket cost?
Let me check. The bus ticket costs $2.75.
My flight departs in 2 hours, and I want to go to the souvenirs shop.
Let me guide you. Let's take the elevator. Walk 13 feet. Turn slightly right and walk 8 feet. Approaching souvenir shop in 10 feet. You have arrived at souvenir shop.
Describe the t-shirts.
Processing the scene may take a few seconds. The image shows a display case with various items. There are 2 shirts hanging in the case, one with a graphic of a city skyline and another with text that includes Pittsburgh and Bridge.
Okay, can you provide some information about my flight status?
Your flight DL369 will begin boarding in 50 minutes at gate C34.
I have time for a coffee. Where can I get one?
Searching. There is a Dunkin' Donuts 60 feet away. Let me guide you. Turn left and walk 8 feet.
Let me
So you can
switch
just put it
the-
on the last slide now.
Yes. Oh, and now the audio's on. Okay. So yeah, let me reshare with this last.
There's no more audio. I mean, there's no more video.
Right. Yeah. I just was double checking that we didn't need to go back and turn the audio back on for you.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So now we'll go to the last slide. Okay.
Okay. You want to come out? Yes. Thank you so much, Dara. Oh, my goodness. Thank you. I really appreciate that. So, hey, problem solved. And that's how you get to solutions when you let blind people drive the car. Okay. You guys, I can't hear you. But yeah, anyway, that's the solution in its infancy. And you'll notice it doesn't, well, maybe you didn't notice, but it doesn't use Bluetooth technology. So there's no beacons. You can imagine trying to outfit a place like Denver International Airport. It must have 200 million little beacons with batteries you have to deploy and maintain and manage. And so it's very expensive. This just uses virtual anchors for points of interest and the pathway. So anyway, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. It has been my honor and privilege to be with all of you. I've learned so much from this community, and it's great to be here. Thank you very much for taking time. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think we came so we someone.
It's behind there.
Oh, here it is.
Yeah, sight out of mind. That's what happens.
Right. Thank you, Claudia. It's really great. And sorry for the technical difficulties. So yeah, those were our presentations. Yeah, and thank you, Desiree. Yeah, the AI software that Claudia's company has been working on it is really pretty amazing and has the potential to be really impactful for people who can use that technology to help them navigate around wherever they are.
If I could just add, I know folks can't hear me, but I forgot to mention this. So it actually will help sighted people more than the blind folks, to be honest with you. And the reason is that this distractibility, because they're using the digital world, navigate while they're walking, they're texting and all of this, and it results in something called unintentional blindness. Okay. And that's even worse than being blind because they think they can see and they can't. And they're the ones getting run over all the time too. So this will really help to focus and help their travel. And nobody knows in a familiar environment where the Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks or the chocolate factory, whatever it is that you're looking for, right, in an airport. So
I agree with that. No more like looking down your phone and going the wrong direction.
yeah, no,
Because
no,
you're without the instruction.
exactly. That's right.
Very great.
Yes.
Okay. Can you all hear must be good. They heard that.
Oh, good.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you so much. I want to open it up to questions. If you have any questions you want to ask, and then once we go through questions, we'll wrap this up. Just checking the chat. I see Golden Key. Golden Key, yeah. Yeah.
We need sweet money.
There you go. All right. Any questions? I see. What a great tool. Yeah, it really is. I would like to be able to use it myself. Right. Well, wow, what a day. Great series of speakers, and presentations, and let's take a breath, activate that parasympathetic nervous system. So we've spent the day surrounded by minds and hearts that care deeply about the spaces we live in, how they move us, how they ground us, and how they can do better. From the architecture of belonging to the interior design of well-being, from the science of time and presence to the ethical edge of emerging technologies, we've journeyed through the many layers of what it means to design consciously. And to all of our speakers, thank you for showing us that architecture isn't just about structures. It's about people. It's about creating forms that function not only technically, but emotionally and ethically. And thank you for reminding us that the interiors we move through every day, our offices, our homes, and the space that we're in today can be designed for vitality, not just aesthetics. And thank you to Dr. Lisa Jerome and Claudia Folska for bringing us deeper into the science and accessibility of the human experience, reminding us that conscious cities must serve everyone, not just the able-bodied or digitally connected. So the festival is globally just started today. There are multiple cities that are participating in the festival, and events will be going from today through March 25th. So if you're interested in seeing more, you can register for any of the upcoming events at theccd.org. Look for the Conscious Cities Festivals, and you can register for most of them. I think most of them have a remote option as well as in person. So check those out, stay connected, keep questioning, challenge design habits that don't serve people, get involved. The Center for Conscious Design is a great place to meet other people who have similar interests. And I've really found a great community in joining the Center for Conscious Design. So I highly recommend them. I've never been to one of their events that I didn't learn something and really get inspired to do more. And thank you to Workplace Resource for hosting us. It's a great location. And thanks for showing up. So the recording will be available, I'm not sure when exactly, but probably in the next day or two on the ccd.org website. And I will make sure that I send an email to everyone who registered for today's event, so you know when that's available, right? Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day, evening, morning, wherever you are. Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Safe journey, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for organizing.
Oh, yes, thank you. All right. Signing off.
Or I thought someone sent me a chat. Now I can't find it. Oh, well.
Someone sent you something?
In the chat, but I don't see it. Maybe I just hallucinated it. Oh, well. Thanks for organizing this.
Oh, was Megan. She was asking if it was New York or LA.
New York. Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes. Yes. All right. Thank you.